I am very excited for this interview, Tharanga. Thank you so much for making time. I know how busy you are. This is such an honor to have you and to learn from you.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. First question would be, if singing were a masterclass in life, what do you think would be its greatest lesson?
Well, I think it would be to absorb whatever information that you gather in terms of technique, but at the end of the day, you have to trust your instincts and learn to let go. I mean, I think that's the hardest one. Let go in the sense of knowing that your mind and your sort of the sense of knowing your instrument, which is your body, in the sense of as a singer, our body is our instrument. So just have to give it sort of credit for knowing or having an intelligence that could choose what's right for the moment. But initially, of course, you have to gather all the tools. That is the knowledge of how the instrument works and the understanding of perhaps theory, understanding of other artists before you, how they worked and how they learned, stuff like that. So
You always say you are the vessel and the sound exists outside it. This was fascinating for me, especially when you mentioned that, because I myself came with the mentality of I am the one that have to create the sound. But then when you said voice exists outside of you, you just have to be the vessel for it to move through you. Could you please explain a little bit more? When and how did you come to that philosophy, and what does that exactly mean?
I mean, it could be considered a philosophy, but it's more what's naturally present in the world. I mean, there are so many physical elements that go into creating any noise or sound, correct? So when we think of a musical instrument which is outside of our body, like a piano or a violin or something like that, we don't necessarily think that the instrument is creating the sound, right? We just think that, there's certain things that need to be done to the piano. For example, you have to like press the keys, and then there's vibration of the strings because the hammers hit the strings, and the vibration is like basically part of physics where certain frequencies are made. And why would we think of having more than that happen with our instrument, which is the voice and the body? It's the same idea. You just facilitate the occurrence through breath and the vocal cords being the reed, like in an oboe or clarinet as a double reed instrument. I mean, you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So if you start to think that somehow we produce everything, first of all, a lot of times we get in our heads about it and it becomes so personal to the extent that we become so controlling, and then unnecessary parts of our body, like certain muscles that don't really have much to do with sound production, start to help the instrument because we are sort of trying to make it work or manufacture. So just the understanding of considering our instrument as an instrument rather than just completely like it's all me, it's all me. It should be less about having control over somehow the sound making. And again, like I said before, the process of letting go and trusting the process, that's so much easier when you detach yourself from like, I am making the sound, if I'm making any sense.
Absolutely. Why
Yeah.
why do you recommend us not to listen to ourselves when we sing? Which is really hard for me to do.
I know, I know. So the thing is, when we listen to ourselves, what our focus is ends up being the result of a lot of things that we do with our body, right? So, but the thing is, the result is not what we actually do, right? It's other things that we do that creates the sound. So if you're listening and paying attention to the outcome, we are not really paying attention to what it is that creates the outcome. So what creates the outcome is a physical sensation, like how our body feels while making sound. So if the body feels all the right things, like, relatively relaxed posture and body, and the feel of the breath flowing without interruption, feeling the resonance being in the right area of the face or chest, if we're paying attention to that, we can automatically trust that the sound, which is the result of all of those um, uses of those different elements, is going to be good if the feeling is correct and right. And of course that comes with some experience and learning. But if you're paying attention just to the outcome, meaning listening to ourselves, as you say, then we're sort of working backwards, and that's always somewhat delayed, because we're not. It's like saying you judge a painting. If you're the painter, you're judging the painting, the end result, as opposed to your techniques and the way that your mind works in order to create the thing. So the artist is not necessarily looking at, okay, I'm just going to make sure that all these elements look exactly like this on the canvas necessarily, right? It's the process that brings the canvas to life.
But then how do you know whether you're doing the right thing, though?
Well, first of all, our instrument, which is our body, is extremely intelligent in that I'm not referring to just the mind, it's just the entire physical self. And when you are paying attention to the body and are following certain instructions that are either from a voice teacher or even oneself, like you can be like, okay, I need to get some pure vowels here, and then you concentrate on that. When you are doing it correctly, you would never feel strain. You would never feel like you somehow have to push the sound out. There's a sense of ease. There's a sense of the voice being, somewhat alive and present in the room at all times. And most of the time when things are going well, the body informs you. You have to be able to listen to that sort of physical, silent but very prominent voice. It'll tell you if you're straining. Immediately, like every singer knows when something's not okay. And a lot of times we ignore it or not want to pay attention to it, thinking that if we somewhat manipulate something, no one's going to notice. But the point is, if you notice, you're slightly off track. So we need to be able to gather the right tools to get yourself back in track. And usually a good voice teacher can hear these things, even however subtle they might be. But
Right.
the first person to notice it is usually the singer themselves. So you have to trust that.
Were you always like this? Or did you learn how to? Because okay, let me give you an example. I'm gonna
Right.
make more sense.
Sure,
So
no problem.
I came to your concert at Carnegie Hall, and I was sitting, and it was amazing. And I was sitting in the dress circle. Dress circle is like a little
Yeah.
bit far from the stage, and you were not mic'd, and I
Right.
could hear every single note that you hit from up there. Were you always like that, or did you train yourself to become that way?
Well, what I do know is that if I say always, I mean, I first of all, like, I always sang, even as a baby, like as in a toddler. Like I love to sing. My mom and dad would always tell me that. Um, the thing about me personally was that I was never really afraid to sounding bad or
Ah.
letting myself sort of be silly. And I think that was, although not consciously necessarily done, it was to my benefit, because when you start to not care about those things, whatever potential that there is, in this instance, the voice itself, you allow its freedom to occur without judgment, right? And I think when that happens, somehow there's something magical about the instrument that tends to want to sort of vibrate in places that you really don't have much control over. And for some voices, they carry further. Some voices are richer, some voices are brighter. We just don't know what that is until we let it just be its thing, you know? So that element of not being afraid to let it out, you know, I'm not saying like scream out or shout, right? It's just trusting its vibration to be somewhat outside of myself, right? And knowing that there's an element of understanding that and accepting that is enough, you know, rather than, oh, I should make it sound a certain way, or I have to make sure the last person in the hall hears me, because that part is not up to you. It's what happens when you do the right things with your body and instrument.
I love it how
Yeah.
you explain it. That's so beautiful and so important because one, we sometimes are in our head trying to impress the audience. I am from a theater and acting background, and we have this idea of projecting. So I have been using that mindset in my singing, and you always brought me back into Shada. Think as if you're singing to like to here to this space, and that
Yeah.
changed a lot for me because it took a lot of effort for me to come out of the projecting mindset into singing for somebody who's like this close,
Right.
right?
Well, I mean, the thing is, what is projecting? You know, I mean, we use those words somewhat a lot of times carelessly, I think. Words have a lot of power, you know.
True.
Um, we, our intention is to be able to communicate, right? And I think that is somewhat used interchangeably with the word projecting. Like, you know, we want to communicate to the ends of the hall or whatever it is,
Mhm.
right? So that might be what people mean when they say project, but that word also triggers a sense of a certain amount of force that we feel like the larger the room, the more we need to do in order for it to carry our communication, either through sound or by expression. But what really happens is no matter how small a gesture, how small a sound, if it is in its very genuine resonance or vibration, it's if it's in your, you know, radar, in the audience's radar or attention, that carries no matter how small it is. Like if you think of I mean, I always think about people who would go bird watching, you
Okay.
know. I know it sounds a little like a silly analogy, but I do think it does apply. So if you talk to a bird watcher, sometimes from a distance, they can't really see the colors of the bird or whatever the characteristics in order to recognize what bird it is, but simply by its silhouette or posture, they can immediately tell it's this kind of bird, just when it's very, very far away.
Okay.
So that is enough. It's a lot of strength in like saying who you are from just like a dot of a vision, you know? So our voice, our body as actors and singers, I think has the same power. And a lot of times we underestimate it and we just overdo. And that's really unnecessary. And if you can totally be completely yourself, be the little bird without even knowing that someone's watching, that's more often than not is sufficient, you know.
Less is more. Less is more.
Well, I mean, less is more in those things, but there's also the other side of, you know, more can be good too when it comes to like mentally rehearsing, being efficient about being organized, or um, sort of doing something persistently for a long period of time. That's more, right? Without losing a frequency of practice, or as best as you can, of course, within the scope of your life, and
Of
um,
course. No,
other
you
things.
always say, let the audience come to you. Don't go to the
Mhm.
audience. Let the audience come to you.
Yeah, I mean, it can work in the sense of like just being a good performer, and also just from a very physical sense. If you try to project, you will automatically push, and that just means that, in a very physical sense, your air is going to spray extra and your vocal cords are going to blow apart,
Yeah,
and then your sound is less than optimal, so it doesn't really serve the purpose.
that's so true.
So just the instrument won't work as efficiently, so that doesn't help us, right? Even if your intention was not a bad one, it translates negatively. So
Okay, I'm going to ask you a very personal question, but you don't have to
okay.
answer it, and I hope you do. When you were on that stage at Carnegie Hall, what were you thinking exactly? Because this can be, if you don't mind sharing that, while you were singing, what was going on in your mind? What were you telling yourself?
Well, I mean, I've mentioned this before in some other, like, talks and stuff. Honestly, the place you're singing is exciting, and if it's Carnegie Hall versus like another hall that's, say, less well known or whatever, but you don't really think differently once you're on stage. Like, you think the same things you do no matter where you are, like, so uh the excitement is usually like, getting up to that point of, the anticipation. But the rest of the time, like, once you're on stage, you're in the music. It's not about you, right? It's about serving your art, and uh putting all the elements that you recall from your study and work into the job and creating the art. And that is a very close sort of situation. It doesn't matter, like, the exterior at all. Because it's not really relevant, isn't it?
No, it's not. But do you prepare yourself mentally beforehand in like certain ways in
Mm-hmm.
order, because it doesn't, like you say, it doesn't matter whether the audience is like 10 people or 10,000 people, right? When you go on
Mm-hmm.
the stage, you will disappear from your environment and you go into the music and into singing. But should we prepare ourselves like mentally ahead of time? Would you recommend, or what would you do yourself?
Well, the thing is, okay, there's two things to it. One is what you do to prepare as a ritual. Like, if you recall, like in my classes that I teach, we kind of do, not always pretty fixed, but the same sort of warm-up routine. So it becomes like you get into a mode after that, sort of. So if I usually do something similar for myself, I practice the same way, and I do the same right before a performance, so you don't feel like there's something foreign about the experience. I
Right.
think that's kind of important. That is sort of creating your mindset to be in a place that's familiar. It's not, again, like I said, it's not about the external, like, location that you're in. It's a very internal room that you create for yourself, right? And that, if you've been doing this for a while, like, this is how you practice, this is my way of warming up, finding my resonance, finding my airflow, that is the space that your mind is at. Doesn't matter where you go. Now, that's one element which is very, very important. So that is one way of preparing yourself to sing wherever. And then also, again, in the long run, you're also sort of thinking, am I getting enough sleep and nutrition, that kind of thing. That is just to keep your body in good form, because it is your instrument, right? And then the very specific ones to the event itself, like the particular show that you're speaking of. I hope you don't mind my mentioning, but certain things happen right before, concerts, life happens, right? Uh, the concert, I believe, was on the 16th of March, I think. Um, my father passed away on the 1st, right? So
Wow.
now that was specific. So, I mean, it doesn't need to be that extreme, but things happen. It could be like one could get fired from a job, or your management could have issues with you, or like, you never know, like as an artist, all kinds of things happen. So when it comes to those kinds of things, for me personally, I think the fact that what we do is much more than a job kind of plays a big role, because singing is not just a job, at least not for me and not for a lot of people that I know. It is somewhat my place of consolation, place of my history, like how it took me to places that I never would have dreamed of. So a place of where gratitude springs from, a place of so much memories created with my dad or my mom. Um, so it's a privilege to have that, like, as a companion. If you think of me separate from my art, it never leaves me. So
Wow.
there's a sense of strength that you actually gain from it, rather than, oh, these such and such things have happened, I hope my voice comes out, or I hope the performance doesn't get affected by it. But in fact, it takes you through things. So it's very powerful, the arts. It's a lot more than, I think, jobs that are considered just jobs. But not to say it's not a job. It really is a job. Like, one should, be valued for the kind of work you do and all that. But it's definitely more than that. So those are the three elements, just maintaining your instrument, learning how to embrace your personal situations, and then, of course, having a ritual which makes one feel like, you know, every situation is not so foreign, because you set yourself up through a ritual into your performance.
That's right. Sending so much blessings to your dad in heaven.
Oh, thank you.
He played a significant role in your life. I was
Mm.
listening to one of your interviews, and he was the one who brought you to America, who sat beside you. I would like to dive into that journey if you don't mind. I had no idea that you grew up in civil war in Sri Lanka,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, the war started in the early 80s, and that's when I was born. So, that I mean, the truth is that I'm not really sure how it may have affected me, because that's just the childhood I know. Uh, but yes, my dad played a pretty significant role in my life, and equally so my mom. They played different roles,
Yeah.
but I think how my sister and I were both sort of nurtured, taken care of, even maybe shielded from the bad news that was happening, because of the war and stuff. Giving us enough of the reality, but not maybe too much of it and stuff like that. I think as parents, they did a pretty amazing job, so that we're not completely like tormented by it, or neither are we living in some sort of a cocoon. So that, I think that must have been quite a challenge. I mean, being a parent myself, I can't imagine having that other element that is so forceful while you're trying to raise kids in normal conditions, whatever you call
For
normal.
sure.
Yeah, so
But were
uh,
you always singing when you were a child?
I was actually, I'm not just singing. I like to create things. Both my parents are like that too. Um, you know, Crafts and art, and but at the same time, I also love numbers, and like I'm very math oriented. So that's like, the thing is, I mean, now I'm not surprised, and one should always not be surprised by it, but because most of us are a lot of things, and we're pretty quick to sort of narrow things down for ourselves. The moment one thing sort of shows as a strength, I think people talk a little bit too much about it, especially when you're a kid. Like if you suddenly like sing a song and like you're always the kid who sings, you know what I mean? I don't think that's a good thing, because different strengths show up at different times. And one of the things in my upbringing, both through school and my home, was that sure, people knew I could sing from an early age, but they didn't only see that, you know? Uh, Not just for me, for others as well. Like it was more like, oh, what else have you got? What else is in the box, kind of thing, you know, which was exciting
Right.
because I think all of those developing and being paid attention to at given times, you learn to sort of do whatever you do to the best of your ability, even if you may fall short sometimes, you know. And especially as an artist now, when I think about it, that process contributes to all those, you know, it's not just the ability to sing that makes you a good artist, if you are a good artist at all, right? It's the experience, it's the knowledge of other elements of life, and your how you relate to the world, so that you can actually communicate your point of view through your music or otherwise. So it is very important not to just be pigeonholed, definitely not too early, you
Yes.
know.
Yes.
Eventually you can choose if you don't want to do certain things, but yeah, so with all, like, you know, with the civil war situations or whatever the circumstances may be, there are a lot of ways that, you know, kids can be nurtured, I think. I mean, of course there are certain situations, you know, if it's especially war related, if you're not in the right place and right safety situations, things can be pretty bad. So I do consider myself quite fortunate that it wasn't all good, but it wasn't also all bad, you know? So I was one of the probably blessed kids. So was my sister.